Hi there, and welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. What I'm going to do in the next hour is walk you through leveraging social media to drive ROI to your website. So let me get started here. Here's who I am. I'm the head of digital strategy and design for eDynamic. eDynamic is a digital consulting firm that helps clients engage customers through cutting-edge interactive solutions. So basically, we're the cross between an agency and a systems integrator, providing consultancy and interactive websites. We were founded in 1999. We target mostly the mid-sized to Fortune 500 companies, and we have experience across the diverse verticals across the U.S., Canada, and the Middle East. So what we're going to cover off today is why communities, some examples of communities. I touched a little bit on social media add-ons to your site, the key elements of a branded community, obstacles and risks, the steps to building a strategy, and how we can help. And during the process, we'll be having a poll, a couple of polls, just to get your feedback on what's going on. So the first slide I wanted to show is the social ecosystem. And really, when people look at social media, they look at it, in my experience, from quite myopic views instead of seeing the big picture. And I felt that this chart shows a really good example of how social medias kind of span across the ecosystem. We start out with internal communities, and we've seen internal communities for many years with intranets. They've been around since probably the web started. But then we started building out more and more communities. The next level out is the closed community or a closed network. And that's basically for people that you do business with outside of your organization. Let's say you're a manufacturer and you want to have a closed community to your resellers or your retailers. And then you have customer communities. So those are communities that are within your website that you own as a corporation. So those are managed websites, listening, supporting, building reputation. And then we expand that ecosystem out to cover off the social media applications that we see have broad-based participants today: Facebook, YouTube, forums, blog, LinkedIn. So when we talk about communities, there's multiple ways of looking at it. And what I'll do in the next few slides is walk through some examples of these communities. So first off, why have a community? One is and the communities when I'm talking to are the communities on your own website and communities on external websites. So why have them? One is to build an increased affinity and customer engagement with your brand. Other communities are about acquiring leads. Other communities, mostly the ones that are managed on your corporate websites, are to reduce support calls and emails and give peers the opportunity to support themselves. Other reasons to have communities in or outside of your own domain is to advocate your position as a company that cares. It shows transparency. It shows openness. One is also to create a market positioning that you're social media savvy, to stay competitive, because more often than not, your peers are probably already there. A really key one is to gain insight and learn about your customers. If you can listen to what they're saying, there's no need for focus groups anymore. And it really helps you gain insight into what people care about your company and the products you're selling. One example is ideation. You use the external communities to help get ideas that you can bring into your organization. And lastly, the internal community is about team building. So let me show you some examples. A really great example is the Nike Running Hub. And it's integrated with the gear that's on your shoe and that you tape around your chest so that you can get the pulse, see how fast you're going. But it's also really about group participation. And the groups flourish around the conversations that they're having and the way that they challenge each other. I think Nike's done a phenomenal job at building that whole affinity to their brand, increasing usage of their products and their gear. but really creating a real strong sense of community around being a Nike participant. The next example is My Health Community, and basically they call it My Cancer Hub. And it's a really great example of how people can form a strong bond through the internet, and in this case, they can stay anonymous. So what that means is that they don't actually have to go into a group of people and stand up in front of them and say, I have cancer, I need help. They can share anonymously in this group. The next example is the Intuit Small Business Online Community. And Intuit is definitely a leader in this category. They built an online community for support very early on in the early days. And what they do, what Intuit does, is they encourage active participants with the accountants and the strong influencers in the home or small business finance community. Users are allowed to post stories to escalate their presence in the community. And the more active you are in the group, the more kudos you get. And then you get posted on a leaderboard for being a heavy participant. This leaderboard activity encourages other small businesses to get involved. Another example is the American Express Small Business Community Open Forum. It's less about user participation, but it's more about providing learning and sharing of information. And what I like a lot about the American Express Open Forum is that they push their content out to lots of different sites, driving traffic back to their site. So not only are they building an affinity and an awareness of American Express, they're really creating great content that drives users back to their site that actually end up in leads. Another example is the BlackBerry community, and we've heard a lot about BlackBerry. We've heard about the Crackberry community, which isn't a BlackBerry community, but it still builds up that affinity to the BlackBerry. So RIM actually has two communities. One of them is focused on building the affinity to the brand. The other community is focused on providing support. So you can see some interesting things in here is the blog feed, recently solved, the latest trending topics. So the goal of the BlackBerry community is to decrease support costs, increase affinity, and increase usage. Another great example of an existing community is Starbucks. And Starbucks, my Starbucks idea is all about getting ideation for the organization. So what that means is through this, they can get ideas of things that they should be presenting or ideas that they should be providing to their customer base. And there's lots of great stories that came out of share, vote, discuss, see ideas, the little sticks that go in the top of the coffee cup so the coffee cup doesn't spill, the pumpkin spice coffee. So there's lots of ideas that they have garnered by being transparent and open and really asking for feedback from their community. Another great example is using Facebook to drive activity. And more and more I've seen companies using Facebook for a lead generation tactic. So they're putting contests on Facebook as a method to get users' names and email addresses, getting an increased fan base, but really to drive that acquisition, to drive the names so they can get closer to their community and having increased and longer-term conversations. The Twitter community is one that, actually Twitter is very interesting because it seems to garner a lot of publicity, but the latest stat I read is that really only 10% of the population are really active, 10% of the internet population is really active on the Twitter community. But I really encourage you to get in there and find out what's going on. I mean, when there was an earthquake in Toronto, Twitter was the first place I heard about it. So it's a great place to find out what's happening. Learn about learn a lot about a very specific category, that you can narrow down your searches, you can narrow down the information and find out about specific vertical markets. Great place to promote your company, share your expertise, build credibility. I see it kind of as a dashboard for seeing what's happening on the internet, because all of these tweets are short, concise tidbits of information with links, so if you're interested in getting more information. The internal communities, the example I have up here is Yammer, and I've also heard a lot about Salesforce's Chatter. What it's really about is increasing internal engagement. And you can see Yammer, it's really interesting. It looks a lot like Facebook, but it's about building affinity, community within your employees, providing them with the ability to share information, to chat, and to really get a sense of camaraderie. So that's a quick overview of all the types of communities out there with examples. Next, I'm going to turn to social media add-ons for your site. And what I've shown you here is a little bunch of snippets of things that you can add to your site that will bring the social sphere from the outside into your website and for you to push your information out to the social sphere. So up in the left-hand corner here, I've got Welcome Valerie. So what it does is it tells me as soon as I come to the site that I've got 43 friends from my Facebook account that are active on the site. This one here, the friend activity, this is from Rotten Tomatoes, so it's all about movies. So it shows me what my friends think about some of the movies that I'm looking at. The like button, you've seen that all over the place on most sites, but what's really interesting here is it shows you how many people in the social sphere actually like this article or like this information or like this movie. And I find that fascinating because it really encourages you to press that like button. When you see that there's 630,000 people out there that actually like what you like, it really encourages you to do the same. And then I wanted to also, don't forget about Google+. Google+ is heavily trending. I mean, we've seen some huge uptake on people getting into Google+, and it's something that you should not discount. You should really take a close look at, because anything that Google does in general has had a lot of success. Also over here, again, showing how many people actually retweeted, or how many people actually like, or how many people actually Google Plused it, I think is a very nice attribute to encourage that participation. And then lastly, in the bottom right-hand corner here, it shows you how many followers, but it also shows you pictures. And there's nothing better than being somewhere or on a site or looking at a restaurant site, for example, or looking at an article and seeing pictures of your friends that are actually also following it. Pictures, like, you know what they say, the picture tells 1,000 words. And then lastly, if there's a capability for your website, is to allow them to sign into your blog or sign into comment using a Facebook or your Twitter account. It just makes sign-in that much easier. And then I don't want to discount LinkedIn. LinkedIn is trending really quickly. Actually, for many years it's trending up. But they've been lately adding some really great features that are really valuable for the B2B marketplace. You can see here, LinkedIn lets companies post status updates. So when you look at, so this is a Mashable website right inside LinkedIn. And then you can see Mashable has so many followers. What's also really interesting is that when you click on some of those links, you can see all of the people that have recommended this article or that have retweeted this article. And you can see people that are in your network or outside of your network. And lastly, from terms of social media additions to add into your site, the Twitter feed I find is a very valuable tool, because what it does is it shows that you're really active in the social sphere. It shows you what's trending because it's bringing in the Twitter feed. So here's an example of a Twitter feed that's dropped into a site. That could be the latest tweets. Here's one, just the most up-to-date tweet. And the other example on the right is how the ESPN has dropped in the Twitter feed from the NBA. And you can see it makes you want to come to the NBA site instead of to the Twitter site, again, driving traffic to your site, encouraging interactivity, showing that you're savvy in the social sphere, but also being the place to go rather than sending people away to Twitter. It's bringing people into your site. So now I'm going to pass it over, and we're going to do a quick poll. Okay. Tammy, are you going to do the poll? Oh. So here's the poll. The question is, where are you spending the majority of your effort? LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or on-site communities, or none of the above? And I'll just give you a couple more minutes or a couple more seconds to vote. Okay, so 82% of you voted. So this is great. So 33% of you are active on Facebook, 22% on LinkedIn, 0% on Twitter, which backs up my the latest readings I've read, that there are not a lot of people on Twitter, a lot of people reading it, but not a lot of people active, and 11% communities on your website, and 33% none of the above. So maybe what this tells me is that this presentation will get you engaged in the social media, and I'll give you some steps on how to get there. Okay, let's continue on. So for those 33% of you that are not engaged, here's some reasons why. So why use social media for a support perspective? So people that have these social communities on their site, some of them are using significantly for support. So from the studies that I've read, this is a study from Jive, it says that people are saying that they have a 28% decrease in support calls, 33% increase in customer satisfaction, 31% customer retention, increasing sales, web traffic, customer ideas, that's the ideation, and increase in customer communication. These are great numbers and really are valuable if you're pitching this to your executive team trying to get budget. So why communities for social marketing? 34%, so what this Jive study said is a 34% increase in brand awareness. The other thing, when you're pushing out all this information to all these third-party communities, you're driving people back to your site. The other clear benefit is that you're increasing your rankings in the Google searches. So when we show these numbers of 34% increase in brand awareness, 33% increase in click-throughs from Google searches, the more websites pointing to your site, the higher your ranking in Google, the higher the traffic to your site. And the more traffic to your site brings in more increase in website sales. And then we see the other benefits that come out of this is increase in customer retention, increase in customer feedback and ideas. So let's go to the next slide, which what are the key elements of community? So one of them, the key elements in any community are, number one, is customer-focused community building tools. So what I'm talking about here is tools that support group interaction, tools that engage the visitor, that ask. For example, one example is the poll that we just had on our site. One is encouraging feedback. At a very basic level is just simply giving a thumbs up or a retweet. So tools that allow them to become involved in their communities. Number two is user profiling and reputation management. What I showed earlier on in the Intuit case is that there were lots of places where the Intuit community attendees are part of the attendees could actually go in and rank and rate other people. We've seen that in eBay very early on, where users were users could be ranked based on their reputation. So basically, if somebody was a trustful reseller of product, they could be ranked and rated. The same holds true for these communities, is that if you're in there to cultivate advocates, to reward the people that are actively participating, it makes people want to engage more. Number 3 is integration with the social web. So having a community that's only internally focused, that doesn't encourage users from the outside, will not grow your internal community. So really taking your website and your blog and your internal community and allowing that sharing capability out to the social sphere. Number 4 is actionable analytics. Now, what's really interesting is a lot of the marketing people that are putting out these social media capabilities, they're not really measuring it and tracking it. And I think in the early days it was okay for people to do that because, you know, it was really about getting your name out. It didn't matter whether it worked, it was just getting your name out. I think the social media has grown and matured, so it's important to put analytics alongside what your goals are. Number 5 is skilled moderators. It's not enough to just get to just put it out there and have people talk amongst each other. You really need to have moderators in there that are encouraging that interactivity and that can monitor the areas and drive people back to the conversations that they should be having. Again, about you just can't build it and they will come, is you need to provide, you need to have people, you need to have a calendar of information, a calendar of content that you're going to have, and assigned contributors. And lastly is the ideal scenario is a workflow connection to traditional CRM systems. So a connection to your Salesforce, your CRM system. For example, for the lead generation, bridging it to your Salesforce. A connection to your knowledge bases so that you're not starting again every time you're answering a question on your website, so that there's access to a knowledge base of information that the moderators or that the people actively participating have access to, so you're not repeating the answers over and over. So I'm going to jump to now the obstacles and risks. For that 33% of you that said that you haven't really engaged, here's some stats about what the obstacles are in the marketplace. And I'm going to address how to tackle these obstacles. But interesting enough, from the customer support side and from the marketing side, their obstacles and risks differ slightly. But it's very interesting that you'll see number C, for example, is very large. It's coordination across teams and departments. B is resources to scale our effort. I've heard that over and over, that the people are lacking resources. Oftentimes, it used to be in the early days, it was very difficult to get executive buy-in. But I think we've seen the executive buy-in to it more and more now. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go do another poll, and we're going to find out from you what your obstacles and risks are. So let's open the poll. So the questions are, what are the obstacles for you participating? No executive buy-in, no budget, no resources, or other. So no executive buy-in, no budget, no resources, or other. We got 30 seconds. Let's see what you have. So far we have no resources. That one I hear over and over. And I'm going to address some of these issues. Okay, no executive buy-in is trending. Okay, so what we have, by far, no resources is the number one reason, or is the number one challenge. So let me jump now to building a strategy, and hopefully that will address or help you overcome some of the obstacles that you're facing. So there are 8 steps to building a strategy, and I'll walk through each of these. The first step is monitor. I believe that the first step in understanding where you need to go to build your strategy is to monitor the social sphere. And monitoring doesn't mean going to Twitter and typing in your company name and then going to Facebook and then going to LinkedIn. It's starting with a free tool. There's tons of free tools. I've listed a bunch of them on this slide. Tons and tons of free tools to actually find out what's going on about your brand, your products, your company out there in the social sphere. So with these free tools, the first step is to listen, to learn, understand, document issues. And I've read one where it said the best way to get executive buy-in, for example, is to show them some of the bad stuff that's happening out there. I don't know if you've heard about the Domino's pizza. Is that there was a bad YouTube video that got up and it spread like wildfire on the internet, and it really created a damaging effect for Domino's Pizza. That really taught them a lesson that they need to pay attention and monitor what's happening out there. And as a result, they've overcome some huge, huge barriers, and now they're one of the most socially savvy brands out there today. So once you understand what's happening out there, you can build a baseline. So you can say, today, here's the strength of our brand. Here's the passion. Here's how passionate people about it. Here's how many people we are reaching. And here's the sentiment, whether it's negative or positive. And Tweetdeck is another example of a tool to monitor the Twitter sphere. The next step is to create goals. So create goals that you can measure. So a lot of the measuring tools out there, like Google Analytics, Omniture, Core Metrics, there's a lot of tools out there that will measure. So here are some examples of the goals, is that your community constitutes so much of the traffic. You want to grow the sentiment, the passion, the reach, and the strength by X%. You want to decrease the churn. You want to get so many contest entrants. What I did in a previous experience when I was with Virgin Mobile is we created a social media committee. And the committee was a cross-functional team of people. And what we did is we created some standards and created a baseline. So, for example, if we couldn't measure some of it, we got together and we set some, we had every person get their own feedback to whether or not the sentiment was positive, whether or not the quality was good, whether or not there was good participation, whether or not any ideas came out of this strategy, or the strategy itself. The next step is to train your employees. So the first step was to listen and find out what was going on. The second step was to create a goal. And the third step is to train. And I like to equate this to similar to press training. So the number one, 71% of you said that no resources. So I think this may be one of the answers to the no resources situation. I believe that you can form, that social media is a responsibility for a very broad-based group. If you just have marketing involved in social media, then it becomes just a tool for pushing out the latest sales or the latest information or the latest brand awareness. But if the tool also has your call center involved, also has PR, also has your IT group, for example, the digital marketing people, the sales people, and the marketing people, and your call center, you can have that many more resources pushing out information and responding to information on a timely fashion. So what I would do is have a group of key stakeholders within your organization, a handful of call center people, a couple of marketing people, a couple of digital people, and put them into training. I know the Canadian Marketing Association and the American Marketing Association has social media training. So you get all the people in for a one-day training, and it's just like press training. You develop policies and procedures to ensure that these people that are speaking to the public in that social sphere ensure that they can guide the conversations in the right direction. Provide them with the right tools and access to information so that they can have informed responses. And create a one-to-many relationship so that everybody in the community can benefit and have repeatable answers. So again, what I talked about earlier is having those knowledge bases of access to information. So if you train your employees in the right fashion, you give them a certain degree of leeway. You have to give them a certain amount of comfort that they're going to say the right thing. But with the right training, the right policies and procedures, you can really take your resources from one person in marketing having to tweet all day and having to update Facebook and having to monitor and measure. You can take that to a much broader base of people. And these people can be represented as who they are. For example, if you look at Dell sites, they've got multiple Twitter sites providing support, and they have multiple people within those categories. They use it as a product category. So a particular, maybe the desktop group, they have 6 tweeters, and they're all named, their pictures are all there, and they're all responding to users on an ongoing basis. That way, again, as I mentioned, you're spreading the responsibility out over to a larger group. And step 4 is to decide who owns it. Whether it's marketing, PR, call center, I think it's really important and really critical to have one person who has the ownership, but the responsibility, the resourcing could be spread out amongst all of these groups. And I say IT from the perspective of IT can be in a support role. The sales can be from a lead generation perspective, pushing out seminars, webinars that they're actively participating in, PR, marketing. So what you can see is within your organization, you need to put who's the ultimately responsible, and then who are the stakeholders and the contributors. Step 5 is to figure out what are the resource requirements for this. From what I've read and from some of the providers who have internal communities is that for an internal community, you need 1.5 resources for every 50,000 members. After a certain volume, economies of scale kick in because the community starts to support itself. So here's an example, is that at 30,000 people in a community, you could probably get away with 3 full-time headcount. And the next step is to choose the options. So you need to decide whether you're going to just just utilize Facebook, maybe LinkedIn, maybe just Twitter, maybe all 3. Another thing is that there are lots and lots of tools out there to push your tweets or push your updates out to all the social communities so that you only have to do it once. You could decide that you just want to use the social add-ons, but normally if you're going to ask people to share or to retweet, you usually want to send them to a social media community or to your social community. Another option is to build your own on-site community. And number 4 is to buy a community software package. And I've listed about 4 of the players that are out there today that have community software tools. The next step is to determine the risk and mitigation. I always say, what's the worst case scenario? Figure that out and figure out how you're going to deal with them. So I would decide the risk of not doing anything, the risk of using just the free tools like Twitter and Facebook, the risk of that negative sentiment, you know, the Domino's pizza scenario, the risk of not being able to respond fast enough, how are you going to deal with it, the risk of going over budget or being under-resourced. So really understand before you jump in the risk of what's going to happen. And then lastly is to build a business case. So the business case would be, you know, deciding whether or not there's capital expense of building a community, the capital expense of building a Facebook community, the cost of managing it, the cost of creating it, the operational expense, and then the hard benefits. So the hard benefits are, I'm going to reduce calls to my support center, I'm going to decrease churn by X amount, I'm going to use the community like RIM does to do upsell, cross-sell to the apps and to other BlackBerry products, or I'm going to use it as an acquisition tool. And the soft benefits that sometimes aren't easy to measure are increased affinity, higher engagement with the brand and the product, increased connectedness with you, the organization, and your community base, increase and easier support for more complicated issues. Some things you just can't support over the phone. You need to have some visuals on the site in terms of the community support area. You can enable third-party support by actively getting your vendors to participate. And then often a big reason is to just simply to stay competitive with your peers. So I'm going to open up to questions in 1 minute, but I'm just going to touch on what eDynamic does and how we help. Is that we can help you build your community strategy. And what eDynamic does is a blend and a combination of the creativity, strategic solutions, technology solutions on the back end, and flexible and scalable delivery. So we'll help you build that strategy that you need to do as to where you're going to go from a community perspective, whether it's just going to push out information or whether it's going to be a two-way conversation or whether or not it's going to be a support community. Then we can offer up and make suggestions as to what technology can back and that can support that based on what the needs are, and then create it so that it's scalable. Facebook, for example, allows you to manage your Facebook pages with your own content management system now. So we can help you build a truly scalable solution that will not only build out your website, your community, but also external communities. So now I'm going to open it up for questions. We have a fair bit of time for questions, so please jump in and throw away.
We have a few questions. I'll take the first one. Privacy is obviously a big concern on the web. Do we need to include privacy statements or things like when capturing and using customer information from our communities and social networks?
Yes, that's a very good question. There should always be privacy, your privacy statement on any of your web pages. Your privacy rules and your commitment to privacy needs to be on the footer of every page. And what's important too is that that's a big fear of Facebook, and Facebook, I think, has woken up recently in terms of privacy, and they're very, very open. They're giving you lots of tips and tricks about privacy right on the Facebook pages. And I think it's very important that you follow suit and you make it very clear to your community base whether or not their information will be used by a third party. And obviously, with the rules in Canada and the U.S., it's very important that you don't send that information out to any third party, and that you, again, the whole social media platform is all about transparency. So it's critical that you show transparency in your website, in your community, on Facebook. There's another question here, is whether or not we'll be sending a PowerPoint or a PDF of the presentation. We will have this webinar available on our website to view at a later date. I don't know how long it will take us, Camilla, maybe you have an answer for that. When will this be posted on our website?
We'll be posting it on the website, and we'll be sharing it with the attendees as well in the next 48 hours.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so we have a few more questions. The next question is, in the strategy section, you discussed who owns what in resources. Do you have a recommended approach for which groups are more suited to interacting with customers through social media? Marketing, technical, some might be better at dealing with people, and some might have the technical know-how.
Yeah, that's where training comes in, and I think it's really heavily dependent on what type of organization that you're in. So, for example, if you're selling phones, as I did in my previous role at Virgin Mobile, we really needed the call center to be heavily involved in our social media strategy, because there were a lot of questions about how do I use my phone and what's happening on my bill. So we need to have call center reps that had access to the billing system, that had access to the knowledge bases. So they were a very critical component. But I've seen other sites that are really about promoting their brand. For example, Domino's Pizza, you don't really need a call center agent to be actively involved. So they, for example, could be using the managers of their individual franchises, for example, to answer questions, or they could simply be using the marketing team. So I guess the short answer is it's dependent on the type of organization, and you feel who is best. But I think the most important element is to have a myriad of different types of people being actively involved in your social media strategy. There's another question here. What role will cloud computing play as a factor in developing a social strategy? I think that's a great question. And, you know, pretty much all of these things we've seen with Facebook and Twitter, they're all cloud-based applications. And some of the community platforms out there, for example, Lithium and Jive and Intelligent, a lot of them are cloud-based software packages. And when it's in the cloud, it makes it very easy to blend inside yourself, inside your own website. So I think cloud computing, what role will it play? I think it's a critical role. And what cloud computing does is really facilitates the integration of these tools within your website and extending outside of your website. So for example, Facebook, it will allow you to use your own content management system to manage it. That's a true cloud computing environment. Bringing the Twitter feed into your website is bringing the cloud inside to your own website. So it's a critical component, but I think it's kind of it's a critical factor. But everything now with your social media strategy is really in your cloud. So I think it's table stakes. Sarah, another question?
Yeah, there is another question. What's the best way to respond when or if someone starts bashing you on your social site, whether it be a community or Twitter? So ignore or delete their posts.
Well, what I've found is that when people start bashing an organization, usually the community responds. And again, sorry to use the Virgin example again, but I've seen it time and time again where people on Facebook will say, Virgin sucks, or this is happening. And amazingly, the fans of the Virgin brand get in there and they respond to the basher. And that shuts them up really, really quickly. And not only does it quiet down the negative sentiment, it really shows that there are so many superior brand advocates that it shows the rest of the population reading this posting that, hey, you know, people really like Virgin. And another interesting thing is that there's lots of, with a community tool, some of the software tools, it allows community attendees to rank the answers to the questions. So other people can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down whether or not the question was good. And so the community can rank the answer so that you know the answer that's the best based on other people's feedback. In addition, people, for example, can put or click a button to say this is abusive, and it will hide the abusive behavior. So the answer, the short answer is I would wait to see if there's advocates of your brand that will get in there and stand up for you. But if it's really offensive and you think that the general population would find it offensive, I would think that the good strategy would be to delete that. But again, that's part of your upfront strategy building of your social media strategy. How tolerant are you of your brand? How tolerant or how long will you wait for your advocates to come in and say, hey, we love this brand. Don't you say bad things about them? So that's part of building up your strategy. The next question I have here is, what skills do you believe firms need to invest in to develop, sustain, and improve a social marketing strategy? That's a good question. I think there's a story about a big car company in Detroit that hired a PR agency to manage their Twitter feed. And this person from this agency was in his car, and he was upset at the Detroit drivers, and he made a derogatory comment on the Twitter feed. Well, the car company got, bashed in the media for this, and the agency was hired, and the employee was hired, and obviously that individual person wasn't properly trained to understand that when you send out a tweet, it's going out to the world. You need to have proper training, again, when I said just like PR training, on what are the do's and don'ts of communicating with your public. But it can't be too contrived and too, you can't be overly careful with your words, but you really have to have a line, a fence as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable to what to say in the social sphere. So that's one element. Those are the skills that you need to invest in to sustain a marketing strategy. Number two are proper metrics. Is that when you start going on Facebook, my parents own a small business, and they were on Facebook and they were active, and they gave up on it because they said, well, we don't know that anything's happening out there. We haven't really seen any increase in fans. So, and they gave up on it. And I think that's critical is up front. This strategy needs to incorporate not only what are your goals and what are some metrics that you want to grow it by, but how are you going to grow it? Nobody knows that your Facebook page exists unless it's advertised on your site, unless you're tweeting about it, unless you're blogging about it, unless you're getting some of your partners and your other people that are advocates for your brand, unless you're getting them actively talking about Facebook or talking about your Facebook page, or unless you're emailing about it, it will never really get to where you want it to be. So the skills that people need to invest in are basically, the PR training, the writing training, how to write properly, the metric training as to what are the understanding the objectives and how to achieve those objectives. And the sustainability is really gathering around building milestones about these achievements and celebrating those milestones, because it's not until you have some successes will you really truly understand whether or not, or unless you have some successes, you're really not going to get excited about being really actively involved. Okay, I'm just looking here. Here's a question. When you respond via Twitter or Facebook, should you use your personal account or have a standard company profile to respond? That's a great question. What I've seen people mostly do is they create an avatar of sorts, but a name. So generally what we find is that people should really only use their first name or a synonym for their name, like JWB as their name. And always show that they are a representative of your organization. So for example, if you go to the Dell Twitter site, you'll see Dave, and his profile will be there. So Dave, who's an expert in netbooks. So that way, he's representative of the company. He's not tweeting about personal stuff about what he had for lunch, but he's representing the brand, but he's also representing his specific expertise. And that way he won't get a question like, where's my product? I ordered it a week ago. So the quick answer is to use your company. What tools are recommended to measure the effectiveness of an e-marketing strategy? Some of those tools I talked about, social mention, how sociable, those are really good ways to put a metric in, so to analyze from a net metric. So what I'd analyze, an example is sentiment or how sociable you are, your presence. So what I would do is before I launch my campaign, I would say, here's my baseline. The sentiment is fairly positive. The coverage, I only have a 2% coverage or awareness in the marketplace. And I only have a small number of people talking about it, so my reach is very small. So measure a baseline. Go ahead and do your campaign, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, and then measure it at touch points along the way and see whether or not the effectiveness has grown. So whether or not your sentiment has grown, whether or not the awareness has grown. You know, in the old days of marketing, we used to do get Nielsen and do a brand awareness before and after a campaign and measure it that way. In a way now, you may not even need that because you could use some of these free tools that could measure the actual awareness of your brand in the marketplace, a before and after approach. And there's also some of the other more advanced tools like Radiant 6 can give you more detailed and more specific analysis. And then lastly, I would use Google Analytics or Omniture to understand the traffic. So one good easy metric to analyze is how many people come to your site from Facebook. And in my experience, I've seen a ton of people, a ton of volume come from Facebook, purely based on the volume of people on Facebook in and of itself. But if you can grow the traffic from the outreach that you're doing to your site, then you know that what you're doing is effective. I'm just trying to see if I've missed any other questions. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Camelia, do you know if we have any more?
Yes, we just have one last question. What do you see as the trends for leveraging iPad as a key channel that needs to be considered in developing an e-strategy?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, mobile. Well, we've seen LinkedIn upgrade their LinkedIn application. We've seen Facebook be a very strong presence with their geo-targeting, and then with the iPad. We all know about the huge, massive growth of the tablet growth. So I don't see the mobile strategy being as different, except that things like tablets are a very visual application. And in my experience, what I've seen the tablet users, it's about people lying on their couch and using Facebook while they're watching TV, or people taking it as a very portable device that they can use in airports or waiting for meetings or at a coffee shop. So from my perspective, is what that brings is, from a tablet perspective, is that making sure that your social media is very visual, very visually rich. Because in that environment, in the tablet environment, there's a high expectation for a rich experience. From a mobile, a smaller device application, there's an increased expectation of geo-targeting. so that the Facebook offer that you're presenting, if there's geo-targeting capability, or like the Foursquare offers that you're giving, there's a strong expectation of being relevant in the moment. And again, on the tablet, I think the expectation is more about being visually appealing and also, of course, easy to use, because you don't have the keyboard with the tablet. It's the clicking has to be much more succinct and to the point. So I think that brings us to a close. And if there are no more questions, I'll close it off. And as we mentioned earlier, we will make this webinar available to you at within 48 hours on our website. You can share it with your friends or your colleagues, and they can come back anytime and watch it. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer them for you, provide some advice. And again, we'd be happy to come to your location and talk through with you whether or not building a social media strategy or building a community strategy is a great option for you. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate you attending.
The